Chapter 1. The House That Still Called Me Family. They didn't kick me out of my home. My own family erased my name using the law, declared me unstable, and planned to sell everything while I was still paying the bills. I didn't scream. I didn't fight them publicly. I stayed silent, collected proof, and waited. I'm Evelyn, and this is the story of how family betrayal went to court and why silence became my strongest weapon. I grew up in a house that never tried to impress anyone. It sat on a quiet street in a New Jersey suburb where people waved but rarely asked questions, where lawns were trimmed just enough, and where most families stayed longer than they planned. My father bought that house in the late 1990s with a long mortgage and a stubborn belief that stability mattered more than appearance. The paint faded slowly, the cabinets creaked when the weather changed, and the back door stuck every summer when the air turned heavy. It was not beautiful in the way magazines define beauty, but it was solid, dependable. It held us together without asking for attention. My father collapsed in the fall of 2019. He was 68, still running his small logistics company, still convinced he had years left before slowing down. One moment we were discussing repairs he wanted to make to the garage roof. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway listening to words that felt unreal. Stroke, severe, no recovery. He was gone before I could adjust to the idea that something was wrong. At that time, I was 40 years old and working as a senior compliance consultant for a financial firm in Manhattan. My career revolved around risk management, internal controls, and early warning signs. I spent my days identifying vulnerabilities for companies that paid me well to stay calm under pressure. But none of that training prepared me for what happens when the risk is personal, when grief replaces analysis, when loyalty overrides instinct. I stepped into the role of organizer without thinking. I planned the funeral, handled hospital paperwork, shut down my father's business, and worked through unpaid invoices and tax filings. I made sure the property taxes on the house were paid and the insurance stayed active. My mother, Carol Whitmore, was 63. She moved through those weeks as if she were carrying something fragile inside her. She spoke often about endurance, about how families survive by sticking together, about how people were watching us now. Appearances mattered to her. They always had. My younger brother Luke was 39. He called himself a real estate agent, and sometimes the title fit, other times it did not. His income came in waves, unpredictable and uneven. He had never moved out of the house. After our father died, that fact shifted from temporary to permanent without discussion. I moved into a small rental closer to the city in early 2020, telling myself it was practical. I was still paying for the house, the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance. In my mind, I was preserving something important. As long as the house remained, the family had a center. If I let go of that, it felt like letting go of my father. For a while, the arrangement worked. My mother called often, usually to thank me for handling things. My brother talked about potential listings, about how the market was shifting, about opportunity. He mentioned more than once that it was good to have options with the house if we ever needed them. I told myself he was thinking out loud. By late 2021, something felt off. It was not dramatic, it was subtle. Bank mail addressed to me started arriving at the house instead of my apartment. My mother asked detailed questions about my savings and benefits, framed as concern. Luke began using language that sounded rehearsed, phrases like optimizing assets and planning ahead. One evening, I stopped by the house after work to drop off paperwork related to an old utility account. Luke met me at the door with a stack of documents already in his hands. He said they were routine updates for county records, nothing urgent. I skimmed the first page and felt an unexpected tension in his voice. He seemed impatient, rushed. I told him I would review everything carefully before signing anything. My mother stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed tightly. She said she was tired of stress and tired of uncertainty. She said now was not the time to complicate things. She said all she wanted was stability. The word landed with weight. It felt less like a request and more like a warning. I left without signing anything, annoyed with myself for feeling uneasy. I told myself I was projecting. I had been exhausted for months, stretched thin between work and grief. I had seen a therapist briefly for burnout-related anxiety. I reminded myself that stress changes perception. The small signs continued: an insurance notification showing my contact information had been updated, a comment from Luke about how difficult it was to manage things when I was not around, my mother asking whether my therapist thought I was coping well. Each moment alone seemed harmless. Together they formed a pattern I did not want to acknowledge. The moment that changed everything happened on an ordinary night. I stopped by the house to collect a box of my father's old files from the basement. As I carried it through the garage, I heard Luke on his phone. He did not see me. His voice was relaxed, confident. He mentioned authorization, paperwork, and then said that I had been under a lot of stress lately and probably wouldn't remember details anyway. I stood still, heart steady but heavy. The words were careful, strategic. They did not sound like concern, they sounded like calculation. When he finished the call and turned around, his expression shifted instantly. He asked if I had found what I needed. I said yes. He smiled in a way that felt practiced. Driving back to my apartment that night, I realized something had shifted permanently. The house I grew up in still looked the same, but it no longer felt safe. It felt like a place where decisions were being made without me, possibly about me. I did not confront anyone. I did not accuse. Instead, I did what my career had trained me to do. I gathered information quietly. A few days later, during my lunch break, I called the county clerk office and asked general questions about property records and authorizations. I kept my tone neutral, professional. I was not ready for answers yet. I just needed to know whether my unease had a foundation. When I hung up, I sat in my car for a long moment with my hands on the steering wheel. I was not angry, not yet. I was alert, and for the first time since my father died, I understood that protecting a family and protecting yourself are not always the same thing. That was when I decided to look more closely at the paperwork connected to the house. Not to fight, not to accuse, just to see what had already been done in my name. Chapter 2. When my name was erased on paper. The confirmation did not arrive with drama or raised voices. It arrived through a routine system message that told me I no longer had permission to view the tax account for the house. It was early 2022, a cold, gray morning when winter felt heavier than usual. I logged into the county tax portal the way I always did, expecting to pay the quarterly bill and move on with my day. Instead, the page refreshed twice and displayed a notice saying my access had been removed. At first, I assumed it was a technical issue. Systems change, permissions expire. I had built a career navigating far more complicated platforms than this. Still, something in my chest tightened. I called the county clerk office during my lunch break, standing in my car with the engine off and the radio silent. I gave my name, the property address, and waited while the clerk searched the system. I could hear her typing, then stopping, then typing again. She said my name carefully, as if measuring each word. According to our records, your mother is listed as the authorized decision-maker for this property. I asked her what she meant. She explained that a durable power of attorney had been filed at the end of the previous year. It granted my mother full authority over financial and property decisions related to my assets. She added that all recent changes had been processed under that authority. I asked why such a document existed. There was another pause. Then she told me what the file stated, that I had been under treatment for stress-related issues and was not considered stable enough at the time to manage decisions independently. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat there staring through the windshield. People walked past my car carrying coffee, talking on phones, living their ordinary lives. The world did not slow down just because mine had tilted. I had gone to therapy briefly at the end of 2021, a few sessions, burnout, sleeplessness, anxiety that came from years of carrying responsibility without pause. At no point had I been confused or incapable. I had signed contracts at work during that same period. I had led meetings. I had been trusted with regulatory decisions that affected entire companies. I had never signed a power of attorney. I drove to the house that afternoon without calling ahead. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in, wiping down the counter with slow, deliberate movements. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that appeared automatically, practiced over years. My brother Luke was in the living room, leaning back on the couch, scrolling on his phone. I told them what I had learned. I kept my voice even. I said the county clerk informed me there was a power of attorney on file in my name. My mother started crying immediately, loud sobs that filled the room, her hands shaking as she pressed them to her face. She said she had only done what the lawyer advised. She said she was worried about me, that I had not been myself, that she could not sleep at night wondering if I was okay. She said everything she did was for the family. I told her I had never agreed to it, that I had never signed anything. She looked at me with a mix of fear and irritation and said I was being dramatic. She said I did not remember how bad things were back then. She said any mother would have stepped in. Then she said it, the sentence that felt like a blade wrapped in guilt. If you take this to court, you might as well kill me too. The room went quiet after that. Luke finally looked up from his phone. He did not cry. He did not pretend this was about concern. He said we needed to be realistic. He said the house was an asset, not a memorial. He said I had a career, a good income, and choices. He said he needed stability, and the house gave him that. He said selling it made financial sense, and that I was holding on to the past at the expense of the family. I asked when he planned to sell it. He shrugged and said soon, depending on the market. I left without responding. The next time I returned, the garage door code did not work. I stood there pressing the keypad, feeling foolish, until Luke opened the door from inside. He said they had changed the lock because it had been unreliable. Inside the garage, shelves were half empty. My father's tools were gone. Old boxes of records had been moved or discarded. I asked where they were. Luke said they cleared out what was not needed and sold a few things to make space. That night, messages started coming in. My aunt wrote a long text accusing me of abandoning my mother. A cousin said family matters should stay private. Someone added me to a group chat where my name was discussed openly, as if I were not part of it. Words like selfish and ungrateful appeared more than once. I had never felt so exposed, not just betrayed, but rewritten. A week later, I obtained a copy of the power of attorney. I spread it out on my kitchen table and compared my signature to others on old documents, old letters, even greeting cards. The differences were unmistakable. The slant was wrong, the pressure uneven. Anyone who knew my handwriting would have seen it. That was the moment confusion turned to clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an impulsive decision made out of fear. It was deliberate. I returned to the house one last time and packed a single box with personal items. Luke did not stop me. My mother stayed in her bedroom. No one argued. No one apologized. As I carried that box to my car, the house looked exactly the same from the outside. The steps, the windows, the familiar crack in the driveway, but it no longer felt like home. I drove away knowing I had been erased on paper long before I ever understood it, and that knowledge settled in quietly, heavy and final, as I accepted that whatever we had been pretending to protect was already gone. Chapter 3: Silence, Documents, and the Long Wait. It was clarity that finally allowed me to breathe again. Not relief, not comfort, but a steady understanding that what had happened was intentional. Once that settled in, the panic loosened its grip. What replaced it was quieter and far more dangerous: focus. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment several towns away. It was clean, anonymous, and temporary by design. White walls, neutral carpet, furniture that belonged to no one but me. There were no family photos, no inherited objects, nothing that carried history. I needed space where no one could rewrite me. Sleep came unevenly. Some nights I lay awake replaying conversations, hearing familiar voices say things that now sounded calculated. Other nights I slept too long, as if my body were trying to recover months at once. Mornings were slow. Coffee tasted dull. Time felt stretched. I began therapy again, this time with intention. Rachel Moore had a quiet presence that did not rush my sentences or soften hard truths. Her office was plain and calm, a place that felt separate from the rest of the world. One afternoon, after weeks of circling the same events, she asked me something simple. "What hurts the most right now?" I did not hesitate. That they decided I was incapable. She nodded, waiting. Not that they took the house? No, that they decided I could not be trusted with my own life. She leaned forward slightly. When control is disguised as care, it can be hard to see until it is too late. Those words followed me home that day. It was through Rachel that I met Linda Carver. Rachel mentioned her name casually, saying she knew a family attorney who had dealt with power of attorney abuse before. Linda was semi-retired and selective about the cases she accepted. She agreed to meet me after Rachel made an introduction. Linda was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and unsentimental. Her office felt more like a study than a law firm. Books lined the walls, files were stacked neatly. There was no clutter, no wasted space. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything from the stroke to the power of attorney. When I finished, she sat back and folded her hands. "This is not unusual," she said, "but it is not accidental either." She asked to see the document. She scanned it quickly, then set it aside. "The issue here is capacity," she said. "If they claim you lacked it, they have to prove it." I asked what that would require. Timelines, medical records, documentation, and someone who understands handwriting. From that moment on, my days became structured around quiet work. No confrontations, no announcements, just preparation. I requested my complete medical records from the hospital where I had been treated for stress-related symptoms. The process took weeks: forms, identification checks, follow-up calls. When the envelope finally arrived, I read every page carefully. Notes about sleep, notes about anxiety, nothing that suggested confusion or incapacity, nothing that matched the claims made in the power of attorney. Linda referred me to Brian Keller, a forensic document examiner. His office was spare and orderly, every surface clear except for the documents in front of him. He laid the power of attorney beside several verified samples of my signature. He studied them in silence. "These were not signed by the same person," he said finally. I asked him how he knew. "The pressure patterns differ. The entry strokes are wrong. This signature is an imitation." Hearing it stated so plainly anchored me. It turned doubt into evidence. As weeks passed, Linda and I built a timeline: my therapy appointments, my work responsibilities, the exact date the power of attorney was filed. The pieces did not align.
There was no moment where I had been incapacitated. No physician had declared me unable to manage my affairs. Then we found the letter. Included in the power of attorney file was a statement from a physician claiming I had been evaluated and deemed unfit to make independent financial decisions at the time. Linda frowned as she read it. "I want to verify this," she said. We requested confirmation from the hospital. The response came back quickly. The letter did not exist in their system. The formatting did not match their records. The signature did not belong to any doctor currently practicing there. Linda looked at me across her desk. "This letter was altered or fabricated," she said. The realization did not shock me. It settled into place with a kind of grim calm. This had not been panic or desperation. It had been strategy. Around the same time, I noticed something else. A "coming soon" listing briefly appeared online for the house. It vanished within days, but I had already seen it. When I showed it to Linda, she nodded. "They are preparing to sell, which means they believe the paperwork will hold." By then, I understood that silence was my advantage. I did not respond to messages from relatives. I did not correct rumors. I did not defend myself. Every accusation made without evidence only strengthened what we were building. Late in 2023, Linda placed a folder in front of me. "This is the complaint," she said. "Civil action first. Criminal referral will follow." I read it slowly. Every word was precise, factual, unemotional. "Are you ready?" she asked. I signed without hesitation. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, city lights muted through the window. I did not feel angry. I felt steady. The waiting was over. The preparation was complete. Whatever came next would not happen in secret.
Chapter 4. The day the courtroom went quiet. The morning of the hearing arrived without ceremony. I woke before my alarm, dressed carefully, and left my apartment while the sky was still pale. The courthouse sat in downtown New Jersey, a gray stone building that looked indifferent to the people who entered it. I arrived early and waited on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, my hands folded in my lap, my breathing steady. Linda arrived a few minutes later carrying a slim folder. She nodded once and sat beside me. "You ready?" she asked quietly. "I am," I said, and I meant it. When the doors opened, we walked in together. The room was smaller than I expected. Rows of benches, a raised desk for the judge, flags in the corner. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just a place where decisions were made. My mother sat on the opposite side of the room. She looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly in her lap. My brother sat next to her, posture stiff, jaw tight. They avoided looking at me. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The proceedings began with formalities, names, case numbers, dates. My name sounded strange spoken aloud in this context, as if it belonged to someone else. When my mother took the stand, she cried almost immediately. Her voice trembled as she spoke about loss, about being alone after my father died, about how she had only wanted to protect her children. She said I had distanced myself, that I had chosen my career over my family, that she feared I was overwhelmed and not thinking clearly during that time. "I was scared for her," she said, dabbing her eyes. "Any mother would have been." She looked toward me then, eyes wet. "I tried to help. I never meant to hurt her." The words were familiar. I had heard them before in kitchens and living rooms, always followed by something being taken from me. When it was my brother's turn, he spoke with less emotion and more confidence. He talked about finances, about market conditions, about the need for stability. He described the house as an asset that needed management. He said my absence made decisions difficult. Linda stood when it was time to question him. You said the power of attorney was necessary because your sister was unable to manage her affairs, she said. At the time, yes, he replied, and yet you also stated she was working full-time during that same period, Linda said. She was working too much, he said. So she was capable of maintaining employment, but not capable of understanding property documents? Linda asked. He hesitated. I meant she was stressed. Linda nodded and continued. You testified that the decision to sell the house was recent, yet records show you contacted a listing agent months before the power of attorney was filed. Can you explain that timeline? He shifted in his seat. I was just exploring options. Linda held up a printed email. This message states you intended to list the property in the first quarter of the following year. That was before the power of attorney was finalized. He did not answer immediately. The judge leaned forward slightly. Answer the question. I do not remember the exact dates, my brother said. Linda sat down. When it was our turn, Linda moved deliberately. She submitted the forensic report on the signature, the medical records from the hospital, the correspondence showing the altered physician letter. Each document was passed forward and reviewed in silence. The room grew quieter with each page. Linda spoke calmly. The power of attorney is invalid. The signature is not my client's. The medical justification was fabricated, and the intent was financial gain. The opposing attorney stood and asked for a brief recess, citing new information. The judge considered for a moment, then shook his head. No, he said, we will proceed. He looked down at the documents again, then up at my mother. Mrs. Whitaker, do you understand the seriousness of submitting altered medical documentation to obtain authority over another adult's assets? My mother's composure cracked. Her shoulders shook. She tried to speak, but no words came out. My brother stared at the table in front of him. The judge turned to both of them. Effective immediately, any attempt to sell or transfer the property is frozen. There was a pause. A heavy one. I am referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for further investigation into potential fraud and abuse of power of attorney. The sound that escaped my mother then was not crying. It was closer to disbelief. The hearing ended shortly after. People stood, papers were gathered, conversations started quietly around us. I remained seated for a moment, letting it all settle. There was no rush of triumph, no urge to look back at them, just a sense of pressure releasing from my chest. Outside, the air felt different, colder, clearer. Linda walked beside me down the courthouse steps. You did exactly what you needed to do, she said. I nodded. Across the plaza, my mother stood supported by a relative. My brother was nowhere to be seen. I did not feel victorious. I felt finished. As I walked to my car, the noise of the street filled in the silence. Traffic, voices, life continuing. Justice had not arrived with shouting or spectacle. It had arrived quietly, in documents and facts and consequences. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough.
Chapter 5. What I Chose to Keep. The months after the hearing did not rush past me. They unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if life itself was giving me time to catch up to what had happened. By the middle of 2024, the legal process had reached a point where the noise finally quieted. The property was restored to my name. The accounts were returned. The paperwork was complete. On record, the damage had been undone. What had been taken was officially given back. I expected relief to arrive with that confirmation. It did not. Instead, I felt a strange detachment, like watching the end of a story I no longer belonged to. I went back to the house alone one afternoon. The street looked the same. The neighbors' cars were parked in familiar places. The front door still stuck slightly when I turned the key. Inside, the rooms felt larger without furniture, emptier without voices. Sunlight filtered through the windows exactly as it always had. settling across the floors with quiet indifference. I walked slowly from room to room, not to relive memories, but to acknowledge them. The kitchen, where my father stood every morning with his coffee, insisting he was fine without help. The living room, where holidays passed without much ceremony, just people sitting close out of habit. The garage, where tools once hung in careful order, each one returned to its place at the end of the day. Most of those tools were gone now, sold, discarded, taken without permission. That absence mattered more than I expected. Standing there, I understood something clearly for the first time. Getting the house back had never been the point. Control had been. Voice had been. The right to decide what stayed and what left. And staying in that house would have meant pretending none of that had been violated. I decided to sell it. Not in anger, not in defiance, but in recognition that some places stop being safe long before we allow ourselves to admit it. Paperwork could return ownership, but it could not restore trust. Before listing the house, I took one thing with me: a small wooden level my father kept in the garage. It was old and worn, the markings faded, the edges smoothed by years of use. He used it constantly, even when it was unnecessary. He used to say he liked knowing when something was straight, even if no one else cared. That was the only thing I kept. The sale moved quickly. The market was strong, and the house had been maintained carefully for years. I paid the legal fees without resentment. I closed accounts that needed closing. I cleared what belonged to the past. What remained was choice. I returned to my work, but differently. I rebuilt my consulting practice on my own terms, choosing clients carefully, limiting my hours, refusing the kind of pressure that once felt normal. For the first time in a long while, my career felt aligned with my life instead of competing with it. I also set aside part of the proceeds for something quieter. I donated to an organization that supports women navigating financial abuse within families. I did it without announcement, without explanation. I understood now how easily control hides behind concern, how quickly love can be weaponized when power is at stake. There was one final conversation I needed to have. My brother reached out through an intermediary. The request was cautious, measured. We agreed to meet in a public place, during the day, where neither of us could pretend we were somewhere else. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, tired. He did not apologize. I did not expect him to. "I did not think it would go that far," he said. "It always does when people believe they are entitled." He asked me what I wanted now. "I want boundaries," I said, "not explanations, not promises." He nodded once, as if that made sense to him now. That was the end of it. No reconciliation, no dramatic closure, just an understanding that access to me was no longer automatic. I walked away from that meeting lighter than I had felt in years. What surprised me most was not what I gained, but what I did not feel. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel satisfied by anyone else's downfall. I felt calm. Revenge had never been my goal. Control was. I did not hurt them the way they hurt me. I did not need to. I stepped out of the version of the story they were trying to write for me. If you are listening to this and parts of it feel uncomfortably familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. Being betrayed by family does not mean you failed. Being quiet does not mean you were weak. Sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes it is strategy. I did not keep the house. I kept my agency. I kept my name. I kept the right to decide what stayed in my life and what did not. And if you have ever been made to feel incapable for someone else's comfort, if you have ever been told that your strength was a problem, know this: clarity is not cruelty. Boundaries are not betrayal. And walking away from what no longer protects you is not loss. It is the beginning of something that finally belongs to you.